Hi, everybody. It's Sarah Ashby as part of our EN281 Survey of Britlit project, presenting to you on Monday, December 12th, 2022, in Professor Davis's class. So I was really inspired by the diaries of Samuel Pepys and all of the research that went into learning about the Great Fire of London. And I decided to look into what happened after the Great Fire. What was the fallout and the impact of this fire on the city and the people? Some of our discussion questions were things like, how does city impact identity and vice versa? And are there any cities today that are trying to rise, and what's going on? So I decided to do my presentation on that, especially because I've had some small personal experience with like small scale catastrophe in a city and kind of what goes into getting things back to normal. Obviously nothing compared to what this was or what so many other areas of our country have faced before. So I'll dive right in. So small refresh, what was the Great Fire of London? It lasted from the 2nd through the 5th, and over 13,000 homes and almost 90 churches, large scale landmark buildings like St. Paul's Cathedral and the Royal Exchange, almost the entire city basically utterly destroyed all along the Thames. And it was devastating to the people who were suddenly uprooted from where they had to live, sitting out on the boats. And even the impact of they couldn't get off of these boats when the fires were first put out because the ground was too hot to walk on. There was smoke in the air for weeks, even months in some areas. So the fallout of this lasted, or the initial damage lasted for quite a while. It wasn't just something that was over after these few days. There were a lot of contributing factors to this. I'm the type of person who likes to problem solve and troubleshoot. So I was like, what is going on? why was this so bad? What happened here? And so for me, I really wanted to know what caused this to get to the point that it was damaging for days on end. Obviously, it was the end of summer. And so we had dry air, high winds coming in from the east, houses that were built out of wood, and the thatch that was used and everything that was just made to put it together. It was basically kindling, a big city of kindling, waiting for the opportunity to catch fire. And this baker that it happened on Pudding Lane in his bakery in his home, he thought that he had put out the fire, went to bed, and woke up a few hours later to his house just completely gone, totally ablaze. And that spark ignited basically the entire city. Also with that, there were warehouses just stocked with explosives. So there really wasn't a chance to keep this from getting as big as it did with the way that everything came together. There was also somewhat a premonitic fire that happened about 30 years earlier in 1633, which is interesting to find out. It was almost like, hey, here's a warning, get your stuff together, and then nothing happened. And there really wasn't a big opportunity for them to do a whole lot of reconstruction because, I mean, the whole city was in the way. So restoration, or rising from the ashes, you're going to hear me commonly refer to rising from the ashes or the phoenix quite a bit because that is how London saw itself. Before the Great Fire, the city was so close together. There was no modernization in their sanitization practices or anything that they were doing. The Great Plague was just making a run for it all over London, and it was kind of out of control. And so this fire was almost seen as a great cleansing. Think Noah's Ark and the flood. The disease-ridden areas of medieval city planning were just wiped clean slate over the city. So the chance to start fresh was waiting for them. Replanning and restoration acts passed within 5 years of that fire. There was 1667 and then another one, I think, in 70 or 71. They basically said, we can't have our houses built the exact same way and the same proximity out of the same materials if we want to avoid this ever happening again. Talks of widening the streets happened. They weren't actually really widened very much, if at all, because home building and providing shelter for citizens of London was actually priority number one. And the really cool thing about all of this is that the modernization of new sanitation requirements began here. What we saw was the chance for the city to really literally clean up its act, to do everything new, and to start over. The really bad part about all of this is that financial ruin was common for most people. The debt prisons were just overflowing. The damage to London was estimated at about 10 million pounds, and the estimated income in a year at that time was about 12,000. So you can just imagine that utter monetary devastation of the city. The really cool thing that I wondered, because fire brigades didn't exist until like the late 1700s, early 1800s. They just weren't a thing yet. As that fire insurance was created for the first time, a man named Nicholas Barbin, he was an economist and kind of like basically in his day a financial analyst. He decided to go ahead and come up with the first official fire insurance company in 1680. He originally called it the Fire Office, but we'll find out why pretty soon here. He ended up referring to it as the Phoenix because they were rising from the ashes. These insurance companies are the ones that hired watermen, so not firemen, but watermen who were there to make sure that the homes that were insured by these fire companies were protected. So these investments of the fire insurance companies were protected. The fire could be put out, minimal damage could occur. The London insurance companies actually had these metal plaques that were available for homes. They had to be placed up high in homes to avoid thievery. So for non-insured and poor people coming in and stealing those plaques and putting them on their own home. But the idea was that this metal could survive the fires and prove that it was an insured property and that any damage could be paid for. So these people paid a small fee to the insurance companies so that hopefully they didn't suffer from the same fallout that they did during the Great Fire that occurred in London. And trade tokens came into existence. So if you owned a business that was destroyed by the Great Fire, you could be given a new place to conduct your business. And this actually resulted in a lot of people moving out of like the rich London areas out into the outskirts and the suburbs and the poorer areas than where they had been before. So the city and identity, just exploring this idea a little bit, I think that a leader in the city sets the tone for the identity of the city. I'll talk about this more on my slide about King Charles II, but where we are impacts how we see ourselves. I moved to Michigan from Southern California, and my entire identity slowly transformed to fit where I was at. I needed to blend in. I still don't say pop, I say soda. I can't commit all the way, but I do have a Michigan accent now. And I say some words a little funny still, according to my friends and family, but that's okay. I know for the most part, I sound like I am from Michigan now, and I resonate with this idea that I am now a Michigander. I am no longer a SoCal resident. I'm no longer from the LBC. I am from Michigan, though originally I'm a California native. You know, that's just part of who I am. And as soon as I kind of explain that to people, they're like, oh, I can connect the dots a little bit there. But when you talk to my family too, we have all these different experiences that not everyone here would understand. I grew up going to Disneyland 4 days a week because we had annual passes when I was a child. So instead of going to daycare, I went to Disneyland almost every single day. And I grew up surrounded by Donald Duck and Minnie Mouse walking down the street. That's not something that you hear from everyone, especially in this area. From here, I hear things entirely different from people, and even the places that they used to go out to eat. Just all of your culture is really impacted, which impacts who you are. London in itself at the time of its destruction saw itself as this disease-ridden, sickly place that was overcrowded and just non-maneuverable, and everything seemed out of date. And in its destruction, it saw the opportunity to rebirth itself. It was a fresh, clean slate and a chance to start over. Like if we were to leave a job or move across the country, maybe we see that chance to recreate ourselves. And that's what London saw in itself and its identity. And I believe Charles II set this tone a lot. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. One little note here is that Sir Christopher Wren actually played a really big part in reconstructing St. Paul's Cathedral and ensuring it could always be seen. We know that religion played a really big part in London's identity and its everyday functions. And so I think it's important that we note that and pay attention to the fact that this cathedral, this religious landmark, is something that was supposed to be seen by all homes and by Parliament, and nothing else could really block it from being viewed from wherever you were in the city. And I think that's a big deal because England was really establishing itself as a Catholic and then a Protestant place and then a Catholic and then a Protestant place. And just this constant area of religious tension, and this kind of personified that a little bit. I talked a little bit about those ideas for widening the streets. There were a lot of people who were encouraged to leave the city altogether. There were some laws and tax and restrictions that were kind of made. King Charles II, however, actually referred to London as a phoenix and saw it rising from the ashes. When we think of other cities that are rising in America, I kind of refer to Chicago in 1871. They also faced a great fire and had to start over. Unfortunately for Chicago, it was a little different. There were mass casualties as opposed to what they saw in London, where there was only about 6 reported. My own neighborhood saw some destruction a few years ago. There are houses down my street that look nothing like they did when I first moved in because we had a tornado come down our street about 7 years ago. It completely remade my entire backyard. And so my own home looks completely different than the way it did when I bought it because of this tornado just coming through and ripping up trees. There's 2 less trees on our property. Our neighbor has a whole new shed in their backyard, and a couple of my neighbors all have new fronts to their homes because these trees landed in their living rooms and their kitchens. And so we actually see our neighborhood now as this very tight-knit, helping each other out community, whereas before there were a lot of people that we don't really talk to or see very often, and that tornado totally changed us and who we are. So I think that this disaster in London really did something similar. King Charles II, he was the source of this new identity, I think, being such a positive thing. He was out fighting the fire. He called London the Phoenix. He shot down an idea that he should charge rent to people staying in his new homes. And the idea of rebirth after destruction is really central to all of humanity. And Charles really took that to heart. So just a couple of high notes here. I highlight in my creative project, I created a 1-act play centering on King Charles's generosity and heroic deeds during the Great Fire of London. We know that theater was actually a pretty big deal back then, or in older English times, and I love theater. If it was extremely profitable, I would probably be a theater major. I do community theater. I've played a couple of different parts. And so I wrote a short 1-act 2-scene play about King Charles. The first section talks about him being covered in soot and mud from being out and fighting and riding on horseback from one end of the city to the other and paying men in gold for fighting the fire. I really highlight that here. And the first act is him just exhausted post-fire, immediately after. And he needs to rest. He tells the servants to go focus on other people. He generously compensates them each with a gold coin. The servants, after this point during that same scene, I'll share a little bit of my play with you guys here. I'm not going to reenact the whole thing, but I will post it so that it's available above my written reflection. If I can find the window that I am looking for here, guys. Sorry about that. Let me finish finding it really quick. But it talks about the heroic deeds that he did and the way that he showed his generosity and his patience with the world or with the city. He tells the servant to go away. The servants are gossiping about how heroic he was, and one servant thinks it was bad for him to behave as a commoner, while the other one is so grateful for all that his king has done. And in the second scene, we are fast forwarding a few months after the Great Fire, where they are taking proposals from the people of the city to talk about what they can do to improve London and how they can build a better London than what they had before, a cleaner, safer, more productive London. And so we see Sir Christopher Wren, we see Mayor Bloodworth, and we also see an appearance from Captain Valentine, the greedy man himself, who proposed that King Charles should charge people who are living in the new homes that are being built rent. And King Charles rejects him and says that his work should never be published. He basically gets chastised for being greedy and trying to turn King Charles II into a greedy man. So we see a lot of that in my play. I'm not going to go through the entire thing here again. I am going to post it above my written reflection. My written reflection will take place and also above my works cited along with this other information. So just wanted to share a little bit of that with you, and because that's what the whole point of this is to showcase our creative projects. I've got my works cited here, but that's really everything. I was super interested to see like who was the hero, why were they the hero, and what did they do. Hopefully you guys enjoy my very short 2-scene play. I didn't want to make it too long, so it's about 5 pages long, 4 if we don't include the title page. And I hope you guys learned something about King Charles II and his role and how London recovered thanks to his help. Thank you.